I just want to say thank you today to our special guest, Enza Chiotti, who's a partner, director of strategy and insights at McDonald Media. So in case you missed it, this use case that we're going to do today is actually, we originally did it with Bobby Gorzakowski. He reached out in April and we worked on one together. Bobby's with Outfront, as you can see here on the right side. But it was from a media owner perspective, right? As Enza and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, we're like, wouldn't it be great to do this from the agency side perspective, so everybody could see and we could have both sides of the same use case. So if you missed it and want to watch it, you can check it out at geopath.org in our Geek Out section. And again, I'll show you where that is after the session is over. I'll just make sure everybody knows where you can get it. But today we want to talk about it from an agency perspective. So just to give the lay of the land of the use case. So the use case is with Electronic Arts, right? So there's a battle royale game called Apex Legends that came out in early February. And if you know anything about these types of games, it definitely competes with Fortnite, which everybody's aware of. I think definitely my kids are very aware of that game. But with any of these battle royale games, it's critically important for them to quickly create awareness so they can get people in the game. Because if you're in one of these games and there aren't a lot of people playing, it feels like you're the only one there, it's not going to be fun and you're not going to go back. So they need to quickly ramp up, quickly get downloads and registrations. And that's the key KPI established for this. So the campaign objective really honestly is large-scale awareness so that they can get people to download and register for the game. And here are some of the specifics. So the goal that EA wants us to reach is 50 weekly TRPs in each market, and they've already established these markets. So larger metropolitan areas, top 5, so Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, and then their targets. So they want to reach gamers that download and use mobile games. So they want to reach that target, but they also want people who are influencers. So they want to reach those early tech adopters as well. And then if you look at it from a demographic aspect, males age 18 to 34 in obviously these larger metropolitan areas is a tertiary target. And then the format, again, they want these big, large format bulletins, so non-digital static, so just so they can own the area, own the space, and really have a big impact. So just setting up, that's the use case, and I just want to hand it off and kind of chat with Enza a bit about it. So when you get this, right, you get this from a client, what's your first steps? What are some of the first things you're doing with the use case, like with the project like this?
I mean, the first thing that we would start to evaluate is whether we think the 50 weekly TRPs in the markets that they've established is sufficient. So we're going to make the assumption that we think it's sufficient. If not, then we would go back to the client and ask them to reevaluate or make a recommendation based on some other elements that are available in the tools, such as reach and frequency in the market, to see we think based on what they're trying to accomplish with getting people to download quickly, start playing the game, do we think we need a higher level? But let's make the assumption that we think the 50 weekly TRPs is right, based on their budget and based on what their goals are for the marketplace. So let's take Atlanta as an example. Because we plan out of home literally market by market, because we have different types of inventory available, we have nuances in the market. We will look at each individual market separately to understand how is the best way to achieve those 50 weekly TRPs. So in this case study, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on just the Atlanta market as an example to kind of break it down, what our steps are and how we get to it. The target audience is really important here. We're now moving forward with these behavioral audiences, more characteristic-based audiences. So when we're looking at that gamer that download, use mobile games, that's a very specific audience. Very than looking at men 18 to 34 in a large metropolitan market. You're going to have different inventory that you're going to select, different levels that you're going to select. So it's really important that we understand where these gamers are and what units really will do well against it. So we're going to craft the RFP to the media operators that emphasize that primary target for them.
So how do you, I was in the Insight Suite the other day looking at this, and when I look at gamers, there's a lot of different gamer type of audiences. So how do you ensure with all the new audiences available that you're getting an apples-to-apples comparison from the operators that you reach out to?
So there's actually two questions in that one question. The second part of the question, how are we ensuring that we are going to get apples to apples so that everyone is using the same universe space? I mean, you guys at some point may have heard me always talk about universe, and how important that is. So we would make sure that we, as McDonald Media, identify for the media operators the exact target audience that we're looking for. So the suggestion would be on my part would be to go into the insight suites, make sure that you pick one of those available characteristics or behavioral audiences that are available, and then you have to let the media company know that's what you want your information against. So that's on the planner buyer to make sure that we clearly establish which audience it is, clearly define it, clearly lay it out, so that the operators will then pull the information against that audience. I think the other question that's wrapped up in what you were asking is, you're right, when you go into the insight suites, the beauty of it is that you have thousands of audiences in there right now. So when you pull up something like gamers, there's, I think, 10 or 12, so there's quite a few of them that you could select. So it really becomes important that when you look at it, that you understand which one you're selecting. Gamers that download, use mobile games on any device is generic enough for us that we would want to use it. If the client told me they only wanted to go after people that download it based on their mobile phone, that's a different audience. You're going to get a very different audience base. So that becomes the conversation that we would have with the client ahead of time to make sure that we're selecting the right audience, that we are evaluating things appropriately, and that we're not looking at audiences that are too small, right? Because if you're only looking at downloading use a mobile game on a specific device, you have just cut that audience again. So the critical piece of this is to ensure that your primary target audience is going to be large enough for you to affect some sort of change in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, too, I know obviously there's a primary target, a secondary target, and then there's also this demographic target that's here. So from your perspective, how are you expecting the media owners to respond? Are you expecting 3 different proposals one for each audience, or how do you manage that, or what do you expect from the media?
I think that's a phenomenal question overall. The way that I would want it personally, in my opinion, would be against that primary target. That's what they should be focusing against. A secondary target, we generally like to give everyone some more context for the program, for them to understand that maybe they have units that are better against an early tech adopter than they do against a gamer audience, and that gives them the ability to recommend or suggest units on a proposal that may fit the secondary audience versus the primary, so they can feel free, in my mind, to provide that, but I would want to see everything against the primary target.
Gotcha.
The demographic audience is really interesting, and this is kind of a page out of other media formats. When I used to be on the general planning side and planning for TV or planning for radio, not so much the online pieces, or in the good old days, the print world, you really always bought against a demographic audience, because when you're dealing with a primary target of gamers that download and use a mobile game, that's going to be a very small percentage of an audience in a market. So like in Atlanta, it could be as high as 40%, but it could be as low as 10%, depending on what you're looking at. What the demographic audience allows us to do is actually really look at a CPM value and a cost value to understand how we're doing against the larger audience base that falls within users of this type of product or downloading these types of games. So we're always concerned about our CPMs. I know from a media operator standpoint, nobody wants to look at CPMs all of a sudden that are going to be $50 and $60. And when you have some of these behavioral audiences, that can happen. You can get very high CPMs because you're dealing with such a small population base, or a cut of a population base. And then by looking at a more demographic audience, you actually are able to look at it at least more apples to apples with other media, and you're dealing with CPMs that we're more comfortable with currently.
Okay, gotcha, cool. Okay, so we got our market, we got our targets. So what's the next step for you?
So we issue the RFP out. We're gonna, every agency will have a slightly different approach, but pretty much all of us, are looking to send out a grid that will have, a bunch of different asks on it. We take a look at the market to understand what's happening in the Atlanta market, who the operators are that we need to reach out to, who has some of the different kinds of inventory that we might be interested in. And we'll send out an RFP that lists out exactly what that brief was. So I'll tell them what our goal is, what our target audience is for context, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, obviously the flighting that we need, any kind of, if we have a budget parameter. So we send that out expecting a ton of units back from various operators, because that's what we bring to the table. It's not just going to one operator, right? We're going to look at across the board to understand which ones actually can give us not only the best units, but the best pricing on it. So we'll start with the overall inventory, make those decisions, send out the RFP.
Right. So this is a screenshot out of, you can export these maps out of the Insight Suite. So this is, we're looking at all of the inventory here, and it's I had selected the audience. It's a little hard to tell, but it's a decent target comp, 42% for all the inventory across the market for the gamers that download those that download a game to any device. So pretty interesting. So you said you'd share this out and you'd get back a bunch of units.
Right. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is a bunch of units, 171 of them that we got back as being potentially great units for us to achieve our 50 weekly TRPs that we wanted across the market. So you can see the color coding is all of the different, again, this is a sample case, so this is some of the operators that would have responded back, providing the inventory that is available and targeted against this audience. So obviously looking at 171 units, and if you look in the red box where it's telling us what the weekly TRP level is that we've accomplished, we're at 324 TRPs. Our goal was 50, so we've got to cut. Right? We've got a lot of cutting to do. We're going to do a lot of filtering of these units based on various factors to get down to the level that we want. So the first step that we will likely do is go through anything that is duplicative, anything from a visual standpoint that may not make some sense for us, and then we start to do the analysis of which are the units that make the most sense.
And when you say visual, like geographically, spatially, like
it's a combination of the geographical piece of it as well as visually the units themselves. How readable are they, and do they have obstructions, and some of the qualitative factors that come into consideration that when you're just looking at numbers are not telling you the full story of the unit. So we need to understand that just literally the look and feel of the unit in the marketplace from a visual perspective, and then from a mapping perspective, where are these units in relation to where we want to be.
Okay, cool. And just as a sidebar, so you can load the different responses into the Insight Suite and color code them like I did. And that's all we did, and created a custom map out of it.
So then we did an initial cut, based on the visual inspection of the units, based on some of the roadways that maybe we didn't want to be on, or some of the units that fall off for various reasons. We actually cut down those 171 units to a consideration set of about, I think it was 53 units. So those 53 units, when you look at this map now, you can see obviously it's less cluttered. We have good dispersion across the marketplace, but we are still over-delivering against the goal. The goal was 50 GRPs, and we are delivering twice as many, so we now have to do additional cuts. So that's when we really go back in to the marketplace, and what we start to evaluate are some of the other metrics along with CPM, right? So we're starting to negotiate with the operators in terms of pricing, how things will package together. And if you go to the next slide, this is just kind of like a quick sample grid of some of the evaluation that's going on behind the scenes, where we are looking across the different metrics that Geopath provides us. So we have the overall impressions, so you can rank the units based on who has more impressions against this audience versus others. And really the way that I did this, you'll see the color coding in heavier yellow, orange, and then the lighter shading. The heavier, darker shading represents the top 20 units, and the highlighted cells represent which units are within the top 20. So if you look at target audience, those first 3 units do really well against target audience, but then when I look across, they actually do well against rating points, they do well against, the reach number. Their composition isn't as high, though, as some of the other units that are further down this list. So those are the types of things that we need to take into consideration. For something like this, I might want to focus on my overall GRP as well as my reach percentage to make sure that, given that I'm only looking for 50 TRPs on a weekly basis, how much reach am I ultimately going to get? So I'm going to start to look at that as probably one of my priorities.
And so does this change based on client, based
Yes.
on project,
Yes.
based on agency?
This is very, I think one of the keys on this is, yes, it's going to change, definitely change by client. And not only from client to client, it'll change from campaign to campaign in a client, because depending on what they're trying to do, your priorities will shift on which one of these metrics you will want to emphasize versus the other.
Okay.
The fun thing about this is that even from person to person, you might get a slightly different grid.
Within
Even within
McDonald's?
media, I look at this and I may say, here's what I think is important, and here's how I might evaluate this, and then I may have one of my planners or one of the supervisors come in and say, well, if I did it, I might want to look at it and emphasize more the composition than I do the reach. So it's really important that we understand that you depending on what you emphasize, you look at a different selection of units.
Okay. Cool. Great. So you have the grid that you've kind of used this to identify what some of the key metrics are related to the project itself and the client itself, to start to filter to that last bit, because we had 104 TRPs and we need to get down to 50 ultimately.
Right.
So you use this, and then you get to the final cut of inventory.
So now, when you look at this map, you really start to see that, again, we still have the geographic dispersion that we would want in a marketplace. We're not only focused in, a downtown Atlanta area. We're not just in Athens, which, pops up as being really an interesting place for us to be for this particular audience. And doing all of the cuts and doing all of the analysis, we wind up with a much smaller set of units. It's only about 33 panels right now, and those 33 panels deliver 53 weekly TRPs. I'm not going to get crazy about the 3 extra GRPs. I think that's great. We have a great plan. I'm comfortable with the way that it looks from a visual standpoint from the client, and looking at how it does against some of the other numbers. Our overall index in the selection of units is 106, meaning that we are really focused on this audience and we're doing well against them. So we've achieved our goal.
Cool. Brian, just wanted to check in. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we had a quick question. It was about the spreadsheet that we were just talking about. What was the target audience they were asking? I think it's the same as for the map. Right?
Yeah, so the target audience on this, all of the data that you're looking at on the target audience impressions would be that gamer target. It is the primary audience that I'm evaluating this against. Again, that's what our goal is. We want to do 50 GRPs against the gamer segment, so my evaluation should be against that gamer segment.
Cool. Any other questions?
No, not right now.
Okay, cool. Cool. So then this was the final cut of the inventory. So you said you got it down to 33, over delivering a little bit, but that's great. And
this process would happen for each market. Everything that we just went through would literally go through for each market, so that we could better understand, we're going to, obviously, each market is geographically different. We're going to have different dispersion that we're going to look at, but the process remains the same. We're going to go through and select the right units. We're going to filter till we get to the final cut.
So sorry, this might be it's an interesting question that came to my mind. So you're doing it by market. Does the client ever ask for it rolled up, or do they always look at it by market? So would you ultimately look at a complete plan for LA, San Francisco? Like, do you have to roll all that up into one number or one measure?
The only single number that currently rolls up to, for the most part, is a budget.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
So we would provide all of the markets individually. Again, every agency might do it slightly differently, but you typically do it by market. Here's your recommendation for Atlanta. Here's your recommendation for Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. And then what I always love to do for a client is, as much as possible, simplify out of home for them, I would probably start with an overall chart that gives them, here's what we're delivering in Atlanta from a GRP standpoint, from a reach perspective, from a budget perspective, and do that for each market on a simple chart, and then show them the bottom line. How many total impressions are we buying? How much dollars are we spending behind it? There is the functionality of theoretically combining the markets and doing an overall reach against the United States, but that's a whole different conversation and much more complicated.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So this is the target against the gamers, right? The people who download. But there was a secondary target, right?
Right. So remember what I said earlier, Scott's question was about, so how do you use the primary and how do you use the secondary target? And the main thing that, again, for us, what we would want to do is I would always want to double check against that secondary target to make sure that I'm still delivering a good amount of impressions or a good amount of TRPs against that audience. I didn't make my selection necessarily based on that. And this is for this particular example. I don't want to confuse anyone, but in some instances we might have to do both audiences at the same time in terms of evaluation. But in this case, to simplify it, all I'm doing is my primary audience is really important. I've delivered my 50 points that I wanted. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm delivering against that secondary target. And looking at it, it does. It delivers, perfectly. It delivers against, delivers 55 TRPs against that early adopter segment. What if this had been lower?
That's what I was just going to ask. What if it was like 45? Would you add units or would you not?
It will be definitely kind of like a plus or minus. 45, I don't know if I would play around with it so much because I'm still pretty close and I'm over delivering on the other units. I might want to swap out a unit or two. If there's a significant difference, I need to rethink the whole plan. Right? If this all of a sudden had gone down to, let's just say for the sake of argument, 30 points, 35 points, 40 points, I would then go back and start to evaluate the units against the secondary target to see, could I find units that do well against both segments? So it could be, it's like a puzzle, right? You're pulling things in and out to try to make it work.
Okay. Question?
Yeah, a couple questions. One was actually about the data itself and about the grid that we're using, all that. And it was, can you pull this spreadsheet out of the system, or is this something that ENZA created? And there's a little bit of both. If you actually look at this over here on the screenshot right here, say these units are the ones that you want to evaluate, that Save As dropdown on the right-hand side, you can export to CSV and bring it into Excel that way, right there. And it's some color coding manipulation on your end as well. So, and then this one, we can come back to this. I just want to read real quick.
Okay, cool. Just as Brian's doing that, and just any questions you have about the usability, we're definitely happy to answer them as well. If you ever have questions on how to use the tool itself, we can set up trainings for your organizations. We can also you can tune into or go back and rewatch any of the foundational webinars that we're going to be doing, because that's where we're going to be talking about a lot of the actual how-tos within the tool itself. So cool. So this one, we looked at it. We got that secondary audience. We know we're doing good on it.
Actually, just real quick before a couple questions.
Okay, a couple more questions.
So this one says, as an operator, we pitch TRP based on what we can offer. An agency then decides the operator and locations they want to choose that makes sense for the market. So basically, they're asking, so basically a campaign could conceivably be several different vendors for one market.
Yes, I mean that to me is one of the most critical things. I think sometimes the confusion is out in the marketplace that when an RFP goes out and we're letting you know that we need 50 weekly TRPs, and then I inevitably get the question, I don't think I can deliver that. I don't have enough inventory, or my inventory is very specialized, or my inventory is really targeted in this place. Should I just give you everything? And I'm like, give me what you think makes the most sense. I'm not expecting each operator that I RFP to get to that individual 50, because that's my job. I'm going to figure out which units I want to combine from which operator to come up to that 50 value.
So then does that mean if I can ideally reach 35,
send it.
Don't give me stuff that's maybe not really what I want to get to 50. give me the 35
Yeah,
that you think are
if-
the 35 TRPs that you think
Right.
are the best, most awesome ones.
Right. You know, I know that there's a wish that you could as an operator that you could deliver the full 50 and that I'm only buying from you, but the reality is that if I'm doing my job properly, I need to look across all of the operators in a market and figure out which units give me the dispersion that I need, and then ultimately achieve the metrics that I want.
Gotcha. Cool.
A couple others actually. This one's pretty interesting.
Uh-oh.
Geopath can currently stack audience segments. Once that feature is available, would you as the agency planner still want to separate out the audience metrics as done currently in order to focus on primary target segments and then look at the secondaries as separate comparison?
Great question. Thank you, whoever asked that, for reminding me, because I meant to make that point earlier. As we have more functionality and are able to combine audiences, when I'm looking at a primary and a secondary, what I may want to do going into this is do what's called an or statement. I want units that do well against either one of these. I could do an and statement. An and statement means that I want units that do well against both a gamer target and the early adopter. But just remember, when you do those and statements, you are going to wind up combining things that sometimes you're going to have audiences that might be a tad too small. So you're going to have to weigh how you want those audiences added together. But yes, the idea would be to probably, unless it's just a secondary audience is kind of thrown in there this is just more texture for you to consider units and not truly something that I want you to make decisions on. It'll be a standalone, but if I'm looking at this holistically, I could do an or an and statement.
And would you let the operators know?
Yes.
You'll be clear.
Yes. We have to
about
be very clear. As if we are the ones who are if we're leading this project, we have to be very clear with our expectations to the operators. And sometimes that's my biggest fear with the grids in general, is that it doesn't sometimes give you the full context of what the request is. So a brief that goes along with the grid is really important so that I can help my reps understand what my expectation is. It's really critical that we work that way.
Gotcha. Cool. Any more?
Yeah, just one more.
Question?
This is actually for us about the data and the audiences themselves.
Okay.
How does the Insights tool determine which locations reach a target audience, like early adopters or other consumer profiles? What is the methodology? And we can talk about that briefly. We also have a bunch of materials on our Geek Out library that can help talk about that too.
Yes. So we developed a one-pager that for this exact question. So ultimately, we are partnering with Claritas as our demographic partner, and so with that data, we have the demographic data at a census block group level. So that allows us to understand the neighborhoods and these block groups in terms of demographics, in terms of behaviors, in terms of psychographics. So we can understand the neighborhoods, and then we also have to lay that against the movement of the audience. So separately with the mobile data, we're able to understand the movement of the audience throughout the entire country, honestly. So we create a movement profile. And so then we have to understand the movement and how that takes them in front of the inventory. And because of that, we're able to layer in the demographics as we contextualize that in front of the units themselves. So we're able to understand the people from each neighborhood moving in front of those inventory. And then because we understand the demographics of that neighborhood, we're able to understand proportionally kind of what percent of those people say they've been to a Starbucks in the past 30 days or been to
Or have downloaded a game.
or a gamer that's downloaded a game past 30 days. So, but there is a one pager, and I can show you guys where that is before we get off the call as well. So, cool.
We're good for now.
Great.
Now, the other thing is remember we had the demographic audience of men 18 to 34. So when we, again, all we're doing is we're taking the same units that we had pulled together against that gamer target, and now we're just looking to see how they deliver against that demographic audience. And you can see that we're actually delivering higher TRPs, 66, which is fine. because this was a tertiary demographic audience. As I said, a lot of times what I'll be using the impression numbers for on this is more from a CPM evaluative standpoint, so that I can compare it to other things that I'm looking at, as well as not to show sometimes really high CPMs. So it looks like we're over delivering against this men 18 to 34 demographic, but that's actually a really interesting point to take into consideration. Because if we had started from a men 18 to 34 audience, we would have wound up in a very different place than where we did. So keep this visual of this map in mind as we kind of think about it slightly differently, and really focus more on what if I had started with the way that I can start right now, which is men 18 to 34. Okay? I'm looking for the large metropolitan area, and I have that demographic audience. I did a quick poll of units that ranked really high against that demographic audience, and they are highly, highly concentrated in that upper quadrant of Atlanta, in the actual city proper, and then out in Athens. And why is Athens popping up? There's a university there. So for men and young males, it really shows that that was a core area for us to go into. So it starts to limit what we're looking at, or it could even be more generic because it's just men 18 to 34. But I can deliver my 50 TRPs against that audience. I have a set amount of units that deliver it. But when you compare it to what we did wind up with against the gamer audience, you can see the vast difference. We have more units. We have more dispersion of units. Again, I could have played with that a little bit, but I'm trying to make a point. It's more about the dispersion of units, additional units that came in under consideration because they did better against that behavioral target.
Cool.
And the other piece of it is when I now look at that demographic selection, so those units that I did select that did really well against men 18 to 34, and now I look at how they did against those same units, how they do against the gamer target. Now what I'm looking at delivering is 30 points, 31 points against the gamer target. So what did I just do to myself? This is what the client really wants to target. Okay? Men 18 to 34 is a generic audience. This is the key audience that they need. If I had bought against the men 18 to 34 demographic, I would be under delivering. I would not have enough weight in the marketplace against my key audience. And what does that do? That sets us up to fail. We have a client who's interested in out of home. We've gone in, we've bought what we think are good units against the demographic audience, but when we're actually out in the marketplace, we're not reaching enough of that gamer target. This now allows us to really focus on the gamer target and make sure that the goals that we set for ourselves are achievable against an audience that is critical to this client, that will show downloads, that will show immediate response in terms of people using the game.
Great. Are there any questions?
One right in line with what you were just talking about. For an operator submitting options as part of a plan, would you prefer that they submit the absolute top units matching the audience target? Would you also want the vendor to submit submit with a balanced market geographic distribution in line with what you're eventually aiming to arrive at?
Okay, that's a great question because you will get really, really different results. So again, that'll be something that I should determine ahead of time, and I should let you know. If I am looking for just your top units against the gamer target, then that's what you need to provide, and it would be up to me to then figure out the geographic dispersion. I think it's got to be a combination of the two. If you've got two units that are, generally what will wind up happening is when you are only looking at the audience, you may get clusters of units in certain spots. So you should look for a little bit more of a dispersion, even from your own inventory, even for your own sake of your inventory, to think about some of those other units that may not be really, really high against the audience, but still do well. There's still a skew to it from a composition standpoint, but it may not have to be over-delivering, but an average delivery against that gamer audience and maybe is further south in the market, yeah, I would love to see that unit. I think that's really important. That's why it's critical that you're not just looking at top impression units, but that you start to play around with that composition index and the composition percentage, because it starts to show you not just high-value impression units, but units that are targeted.
Great. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay. And just And because you mentioned comp and comp index, that is a metric that's continually being updated as you're filtering inventory on this in the right rail over here. So you can see for this example that's being shown 44% target comp, as well as the comp index of 105. So you can track that along as you're filtering right in the tool as well.